Everything you think you know about what women want is a carefully constructed lie. Not a lie told to you by women, not a lie told by society, a lie told to you by nature itself. And you fell for it completely. You have been fed a script since the day you were born. Love is a choice. Attraction is a mystery. Relationships are built on shared values, deep conversation, mutual respect. It sounds beautiful. It feels noble. And according to Arthur Schopenhauer, it is one of the most sophisticated deceptions in the history of the human species. 2 centuries before dating apps, before evolutionary psychology, before anyone dared to reduce the sacred feeling of love to a biological equation, one philosopher looked at human desire and saw something so disturbing, so fundamentally humiliating, that the intellectual world tried to bury it. He did not see romance. He did not see soulmates. He saw a puppet show. And the puppeteer was not your heart. It was your DNA. You have felt it. That moment when logic completely leaves your body. You meet someone and every rational filter you possess dissolves. Your friends see red flags. Your family sees incompatibility. You see them clearly too. Somewhere buried beneath the intoxication, a quiet voice whispers that this will end badly. But you cannot stop. The pull is gravitational. It is not a decision. It is a compulsion wearing the mask of a decision. And you call this beautiful catastrophe love. Schopenhauer called it something else. He called it the will of the species. And what the species wants has absolutely nothing to do with what you want. Your happiness, your compatibility, your shared interest in hiking and foreign films. None of it matters. You are not choosing a partner. You are being chosen by a force older than language, older than civilization, older than thought itself. And that force has one goal, the next generation, not your joy, not your fulfillment. The child that does not yet exist is already controlling your desires from the future. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Because if Schopenhauer is right, even partially right, then the thing you call attraction is not yours. It belongs to the species. And what the species demands from men and what it demands from women are not the same thing. He was specific about this, ruthlessly specific, and some of what he observed will unsettle you. Some of it will enrage you. Some of it, the part you will not want to admit, will sound exactly like something you have experienced, but never had the language to describe. But here is what separates an honest exploration from a convenient ideology. Schopenhauer was a genius. He was also a man who pushed a woman down a flight of stairs and paid her a monthly settlement for the rest of her life. He was a man who wrote about female nature with the confidence of a surgeon and the blind spots of a patient who refuses his own diagnosis. To take everything he said as gospel is as foolish as dismissing everything he said because it is uncomfortable. The truth, as always, is in the tension. And that is exactly where we are going. Let us start with the machinery. Because before you can understand what women want, before you can understand what men want, before you can understand why your last relationship detonated in slow motion, you need to understand what Schopenhauer meant by the will, not willpower, not determination, not the motivational poster version of will that tells you to grind harder and wake up at 5 in the morning. Schopenhauer's will is something far older, far darker, far more honest. He looked at every living thing on this planet, every insect that crawls, every bird that migrates thousands of miles to breed, every salmon that destroys its own body swimming upstream to spawn. And he saw the same blind, relentless force driving all of it. A force that does not think, a force that does not care, a force that simply wants to continue, wants to replicate, wants to push life forward at any cost. He called this the will to live. And he argued that this force is not something you possess. It is something that possesses you. You think you are a person with desires. Schopenhauer says you are a desire wearing the costume of a person. Every hunger you feel, every craving, every restless dissatisfaction that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning is the will expressing itself through you. You are the vehicle. You are the instrument. You are the Ipsula. You are the instrument. You are not the musician. Now apply this to love. Apply this to the most intense, most celebrated, most romanticized experience in human existence. That feeling you had when you first saw her across the room, that electric jolt, that instant recognition as if you had known her in some previous life. That feeling that poets have spent millennia trying to capture in language. Schopenhauer looked at that feeling and performed an autopsy on it. And what he found inside was not magic, it was engineering. He argued in his essay, The Metaphysics of Sexual Love, that romantic attraction is the most cunning trick the will of the species has ever devised. The species needs to reproduce. It needs specific genetic combinations to produce the healthiest, most viable offspring, but it cannot reason with you. It cannot sit you down and say, listen, I need you to mate with this particular person because the combination of your bone structure and her immune system will produce a child with optimal survival characteristics. That would not work. You would rebel. You would demand your autonomy. You would insist on choosing based on your own criteria. So the will does something infinitely more elegant. It hijacks your consciousness. It floods your brain with a cocktail of neurochemistry so powerful that you become temporarily insane. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin suppression. The same neurological profile as researchers at the University of Pisa discovered in 1999 as obsessive-compulsive disorder. You are not falling in love. You are falling into a chemically induced psychosis designed by evolution to override your judgment long enough for conception to occur. Schopenhauer wrote this in 1844. He did not have brain scans. He did not have hormonal assays. He did not have fMRI machines. He had observation. He had a ruthless refusal to accept the comfortable story. And he arrived at the same conclusion that neuroscience would take another 150 years to confirm. Love is not what it tells you it is. It is a delivery system. The package is pleasure. The payload is reproduction. And you tear open the package with such excitement that you never inspect the payload until it is far too late. Think about your own experience. Think about the person who consumed you. The one you could not stop thinking about. Was it rational? Could you explain it? Your friends asked you what was so special about them, and you fumbled for words. I don't know. There is just something about them. That something is what Schopenhauer spent his career trying to decode, and his answer is both liberating and devastating. The something is not compatibility. It is not shared humor. It is not intellectual connection. It is complementarity. The will of the species is scanning the other person's body, their face, their frame, their energy, and running a calculation you are not conscious of. What is looking for what is missing in you. It is searching for the genetic material that, combined with yours, will produce the most balanced offspring. You are attracted to what you lack. Not psychologically, biologically. The species is using your desire as a targeting system, and the target is not your happiness. The target is not your happiness. The target is the next generation's viability. This is why attraction so often defies logic. This is why the successful, intelligent, emotionally stable person falls catastrophically in love with someone chaotic, unreliable, and destructive. This is why your friends stare at you in disbelief as you return to the person everyone can see is wrong for you. You are not making a mistake. You are executing a biological program. The mistake would be assuming the program cares about your well-being. It does not. It cares about one thing, the child, the theoretical future unborn child. Your suffering is irrelevant to the equation. You are a means to an end, and the end is not yours. Schopenhauer was savage about this. He wrote that the growing attachment between two lovers is in reality the will to live of the new individual they can and want to bring into the world. The feeling you call love, the feeling that makes you write poetry and lose your appetite and stare at the ceiling replaying a single conversation for the 15th time, is not your feeling. It is the feeling of a person who does not yet exist, reaching backward through time, pulling you toward the encounter that will create them. You are being haunted by your own unborn children. You are being manipulated by ghosts from the future. If this sounds insane, consider how insane love actually is. Consider the sheer biological absurdity of it. A rational creature capable of calculus and philosophy and engineering is reduced to a stammering, sleepless, obsessive wreck by the mere proximity of another human being. A rational creature will abandon careers, destroy friendships, betray principles, risk financial ruin, and sometimes end their own life over a feeling. Does that sound like a rational process? Does that sound like a free choice? Or does it sound exactly like what Schopenhauer described, a force so powerful that it commandeers the most sophisticated brain on the planet and uses it as a puppet? The Stoics tried to resist it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that sexual intercourse is merely the friction of membranes and a convulsive expulsion of mucus. He was trying to demystify the act, to strip it of its power. It did not work. 2,000 years of philosophy, religion, and rational thought have not diminished the power of sexual love by a single degree. Monks in isolation still dream of women. Nuns in convents still struggle with desire. The will does not care about your vows. It does not respect your meditation practice. It does not bow to your intellectual framework. It is older than all of it. It was here before you, and it will be here long after you are gone. And here is the part that most people cannot stomach. If the will of the species is the true architect of attraction, then what men and women find attractive is not a cultural construct. It is not a social performance. It is not something that can be educated away or deconstructed in a seminar. It is hardwired. It is ancient. It is, to use Schopenhauer's language, a manifestation of the will operating through the individual without the individual's knowledge or consent. This does not mean culture plays no role. Culture is the wallpaper on the walls of a house built by biology. You can change the wallpaper. You can paint it any color you want. You can hang art on it. But you cannot change the foundation. You cannot change the load-bearing walls. And Schopenhauer argued that attraction, real attraction, the kind that seizes you by the throat and does not let go, operates at the level of the foundation, not the wallpaper. This is where the conversation gets dangerous. Because the moment you suggest that there are biological patterns in what men and women find attractive, you step onto a battlefield. One side will accuse you of determinism, of reducing human beings to animals, of denying agency and choice and the entire project of human freedom. The other side will use your words as a weapon, cherry-picking the parts that confirm their existing resentment and ignoring the rest. Both sides are wrong. And both sides are proving Schopenhauer's point. They are not reacting to the idea. They are reacting to the threat the idea poses to their ego. The will to be right is just another expression of the will. Even your intellectual positions are puppet strings. So let us cut the strings just for a moment. Let us look at what Schopenhauer actually claimed about the mechanics of desire, not what the internet says he claimed, not the bastardized, memeified, rage-bait version. The actual, original, meticulously argued philosophical position. Because what he wrote about what women seek in a man and what men seek in a woman is not a manifesto of hatred. It is a clinical observation of a species that refuses to see itself clearly. And whether you agree with him or despise him by the end, you will never look at your own desires the same way again. The question is not whether you are brave enough to hear it. The question is whether you are brave enough to recognize it in yourself once you do, because that is the real trap. The information is not the danger. The danger is the mirror. Schopenhauer is about to hold one up, and what you see in it will tell you far more about yourself than it tells you about him. Let us look. What she is actually selecting, Fawn. You have been told a story about what women want. The story changes depending on who is telling it. The romantic tells you women want love. The cynic tells you women want money. The moralist tells you women want a good man. The internet tells you women want 6 feet tall, 6 figures, six-pack abs. Every version is confident, every version is incomplete, and every version is designed to make the teller feel comfortable, not to describe what is actually happening. Schopenhauer did not care about comfort. He cared about the mechanism. And the mechanism, he argued, is breathtakingly indifferent to every story you have been told. Start with the obvious, the surface. The part everyone argues about but nobody examines. What is the first thing a woman notices? The pickup artist industry has built a multi-billion-dollar empire trying to answer this question. Confidence, status, frame, eye contact, the right opening line, the correct body language. And there is a sliver of truth buried in all of it, which is exactly what makes it so dangerous. A sliver of truth wrapped in a mountain of performance. Schopenhauer would have looked at the entire industry and laughed, not because they are entirely wrong, but because they are trying to manufacture what can only be authentic. They are trying to fake the signals of something the will of the species has spent millions of years learning to detect. Here is what Schopenhauer actually argued. A woman's attraction at its deepest biological level is an assessment of one thing. Can this man protect and sustain the life she will create? Not protect in the modern sense of holding an umbrella or opening a car door. Protect in the ancient, primal, saber-toothed tiger sense. Sustain in the drought, famine, tribal warfare sense. The world has changed in 10,000 years. The hardware has not changed in 200,000. And Schopenhauer, writing in the 1840s, understood that the software of civilization is running on the hardware of the savannah. He argued that women are drawn to strength, not merely physical strength, though he included that. Strength of character, strength of will, determination, courage, the capacity to endure. He wrote that what women value most in a man is courage, and that this preference is deeply instinctual. A woman does not consciously think, I need a man who can fight off predators and secure resources for my offspring. But the feeling she identifies as attraction, the warmth, the pull, the inexplicable magnetism toward one man and not another, is that ancient calculation expressing itself through emotion. She feels what the species computes. The math is invisible. The answer arrives as desire. Think about this honestly. Strip away every ideological filter you have been given. Think about the men who generate intense, irrational, undeniable attraction in women. Not the men who generate intense, irrational, undeniable attraction in women. Not the men to women described to their friends. Not the men dating profiles are designed to attract, the men who actually, in the raw, unscripted theater of real life, generate that electric, involuntary response. They share a common quality, and that quality is not kindness. It is not sensitivity. It is not emotional availability. It is a projection of an inner solidity that suggests, on a level deeper than language, that this person could navigate chaos. That this person could hold the line when the world cracks open, that this person is not performing stability. They are stability. Schopenhauer was specific. He listed age as a factor. He argued that women instinctively prefer men between the ages of 30 and 35 because this represents the peak intersection of physical vitality and demonstrated capability. A man of 25 has energy but has not yet proven himself against the world. A man of 45 has proven himself, but his biological contribution is declining. The window, Schopenhauer argued, is precise, and the preference is not cultural. It is the species optimizing. Modern data echoes this with uncomfortable accuracy. Studies from dozens of cultures, compiled by evolutionary psychologist David Buss in his landmark work, The Evolution of Desire, consistently find that women across the planet, regardless of nationality, religion, or economic system, prefer men slightly older than themselves. Not dramatically older, not the sugar daddy caricature, slightly older. Enough to suggest experience, enough to suggest survival, enough to suggest that this man has been tested by the world and is still standing. Buss studied 37 cultures across 6 continents. The pattern held everywhere, from urban Tokyo to rural Zambia, from secular Scandinavia to conservative Iran. The wallpaper was different. The foundation was the same. But Schopenhauer went deeper than age. He argued that women are unconsciously attracted to qualities that compensate for their own biological characteristics. This is the complementarity principle at work again. The same force we discussed in the first section, but now applied with surgical specificity. A small, delicate woman is drawn to a large, physically imposing man. A woman with a gentle temperament is drawn to a man with an aggressive edge. A woman who is emotionally volatile is drawn to a man who radiates calm. She is not choosing what matches her, she is choosing what balances her. Or more precisely, the species is choosing through her, mixing the genetic palette to produce offspring that avoid the extremes of either parent. This sounds reductive. It sounds like it strips women of agency, intellect, and the entire complex architecture of human consciousness. Hold that objection. We will return to it, because the objection itself is important, and dismissing it is as intellectually lazy as dismissing Schopenhauer. But first, follow the thread to its conclusion, because the thread goes somewhere most people are not willing to follow. If women are selecting for strength, resilience, and the capacity to sustain life, then something follows logically that the modern world does not want to hear. The qualities that generate deep instinctual attraction in women are not the qualities that make a man pleasant to live with. Read that again. The traits the species selects for are survival traits: dominance, decisiveness, risk tolerance, competitive drive, emotional containment. These are the traits of a warrior, a builder, a conqueror. They are not the traits of a communicative, emotionally available, vulnerability-sharing modern partner. And this, Schopenhauer would argue, is the source of an enormous amount of suffering. The species pulls women toward one type of man. The culture tells them they should want a different type. And the woman is trapped between 2 gravitational forces, wondering why the man she is supposed to want bores her, and why the man she actually wants keeps hurting her. This is not a condemnation of women. This is a condemnation of the trap itself. The trap catches everyone. The man who performs sensitivity because he has been told that is what women want, and then watches in bewildered agony as the woman he adores leaves him for someone who displays none of those performed qualities. He was lied to as well. He followed the script. He was vulnerable. He communicated. He supported. He was vulnerable. He communicated. He supported. He did everything right. And it did not matter, because he was playing by the rules of the wallpaper while the game was being decided by the foundation. Schopenhauer did not pity either side. He was interested in the machinery, not the morality. He watched human beings collide with each other in the arena of sexual selection, and he documented it with the cold precision of a naturalist observing predator and prey. But his observations carry a strange, accidental compassion if you read them correctly, because what he is really saying is that no one is in control. The woman is not choosing to be attracted to the man who is wrong for her. The man is not choosing to be invisible to the woman he adores. Both are puppets. Both are executing code they did not write. And the programmer, the will of the species, does not answer complaints. It does not have a customer service department. It does not care that you are unhappy. It cares that you reproduce. Now here is where Schopenhauer steps into genuinely controversial territory. He argued that the reason women value strength character, and the capacity for protection so intensely is because their biological investment in reproduction is catastrophically higher than the males. This is not Schopenhauer being misogynistic. This is Schopenhauer being mathematical. A man's biological contribution to reproduction takes minutes. A woman's takes 9 months of pregnancy, years of nursing, and a period of extreme physical vulnerability during which she and her offspring are dependent on external support. The asymmetry is staggering. And Schopenhauer argued that this asymmetry is the engine behind nearly every difference in male and female mating strategy. A man can afford, biologically speaking, to be reckless in his choices. A bad selection costs him almost nothing in terms of physical investment. A woman cannot afford recklessness. A bad selection could cost her years of her life, her physical health, and potentially her survival. The stakes are not equal. Therefore, Schopenhauer argued, the selection criteria cannot be equal. Women are more careful, more discerning, more instinctively attuned to the qualities that signal long-term viability because they have to be. Evolution punished the women who were not. Those women's offspring did not survive. The careful ones passed their genes and their instincts forward. Robert Trivers formalized this exact argument in 1972 with his parental investment theory over a century after Schopenhauer articulated it philosophically. Trivers demonstrated that in any species where one sex invests more heavily in offspring, that sex will be more selective in mate choice. In seahorses, where the male carries the young, the males are choosy and the females compete. In humans, where the female carries the overwhelming biological burden, the females are choosy and the males compete. The pattern is not cultural. It is not ideological. It is mathematical. And Schopenhauer saw the math without the math. But notice what this framework does. It does not say women are shallow. It does not say women are mercenary. It does not say women are mercenary. It does not say women are calculating gold diggers, sizing up wallets. That is the bastardized internet version. The actual Schopenhauerian argument is far more interesting. It says women are operating a survival algorithm so ancient and so sophisticated that it makes their conscious preferences almost irrelevant. The woman who says she wants a kind, emotionally intelligent man and then finds herself inexplicably drawn to the cocky dominant one is not a hypocrite. She is a battlefield. Her conscious mind wants one thing. The will of the species wants another. And the will of the species wants another. And the will of the species wins because it controls the chemicals. It controls the rush. It controls that feeling in her stomach that she cannot argue away. This is the point where most conversations about this topic become toxic. This is where the red pill community seizes Schopenhauer and uses him as a weapon. See? Women do not want nice guys. They want dominant alpha males. Stop being weak. This interpretation is not just wrong. It is the exact kind of surface-level System 1 thinking that Schopenhauer spent his career dismantling. It takes a nuanced, deeply layered observation about the tragedy of human desire and flattens it into a dating strategy. It turns philosophy into pickup artistry, and it misses the entire point. The point is not that women are wrong for what they want. The point is not that men should become something they are not to manipulate female attraction. The point is that desire itself is a rigged game. Nobody is playing with full information. Nobody is making a free choice. The woman is not freely choosing the strong man. She is being biochemically coerced by a program that predates her consciousness by millennia. The man is not freely choosing to compete and display dominance. He is being biochemically coerced by the same program running a different subroutine. Both are slaves to the same master. And the master is not rational, it is not moral, it is not fair. It simply perpetuates. Schopenhauer found this tragic, not in the theatrical, hand-wringing sense, in the deep philosophical sense. He looked at two human beings falling in love and saw two prisoners who mistake their chains for wings. He watched them build a life together based on a feeling that was designed to expire once its biological purpose was served. He watched the passion fade, the disillusionment set in, the slow grinding realization that the person they chose in the grip of the will's fever is not the person they would have chosen with clear eyes. And he asked a question that still burns today. If you knew the truth, would you still fall? The answer, of course, is yes. And he knew that too, because knowing the truth does not give you power over the will. It gives you awareness, and awareness without the power to act on it is its own particular form of suffering. You see the strings, you watch them move your arms and legs, and you dance anyway. But before we get to whether escape is possible, we need to look at the other side of this equation. We have examined what women are selecting for. Now we must examine what men are selecting for. Because if women's attraction is a survival algorithm disguised as romance, men's attraction is something equally mechanical, equally humbling, and in some ways even more brutally transparent. Schopenhauer had no mercy for the male ego either. And what he wrote about men's desire will strip away every illusion you have about your own taste, your own type, and your own belief that you are above the machinery. You are not above it. You are inside it. And the gears are about to become visible. What he's ostling forn. You think you have a type. You think you have a type. You think you have a type. You think you know what you like. You have a mental image assembled over years of experience, fantasy, and cultural exposure of the woman who does it for you. Maybe she is tall. Maybe she is petite. Maybe she has dark hair and sharp features. Maybe she has soft eyes and a wide smile. You believe this preference is yours. You believe it was shaped by your experiences, your personality, your individual psychology. You believe it is as unique as your fingerprint. Schopenhauer would tell you that your fingerprint is more unique than your desire, because your desire is not yours. It is a species-wide program running through you with minor local variations. You did not develop a type. A type was installed in you, and the installation happened so early and so deep that you cannot distinguish the software from yourself. He was blunt about this. In the metaphysics of sexual love, he laid out the male attraction algorithm with an almost clinical coldness that makes uncomfortable reading, not because it is hateful, but because it is recognizable. He argued that men are drawn, above all else, to markers of fertility, youth, health, symmetry, a specific ratio of waist to hip, clear skin, bright eyes, lustrous hair. He was writing in the 1840s, listing the exact features that evolutionary biologists would spend the next century and a half confirming through cross-cultural research, twin studies, and hormonal analysis. This is the part where you are supposed to object. You are supposed to say that you are not that shallow, that you value intelligence and humor and depth and character, and you probably do, consciously, deliberately, with the higher cognitive functions that make you a civilized human being. But Schopenhauer is not talking about your conscious mind. He's talking about the thing that happens before your conscious mind even gets a vote, the snap, the instant assessment, the fraction of a second where your eyes land on a woman across a crowded room and something fires in your brain that you did not choose to fire. That fraction of a second is the will of the species making its selection. And it is not evaluating her sense of humor. It is not reading her thesis on post-colonial literature. It is running a biological scan, measuring markers that correlate with reproductive viability, and delivering its verdict as a feeling, attraction, desire, want. You experience this verdict as a feeling, attraction, desire, want. You experience this verdict as intipial. It is none of those things. It is the same verdict being delivered to millions of men simultaneously, which is why millions of men find the same women attractive, which is why beauty standards, for all their cultural variation at the margins, converge on the same core features across every civilization that has ever existed. Devendra Singh's research on waist-to-hip ratio demonstrated this with mathematical precision. A ratio of approximately 0.7, the ratio of a waist significantly narrower than the hips is rated as maximally attractive by men across cultures, across continents, across centuries. Ancient Greek sculptures, Renaissance paintings, modern fashion magazines, the ratio holds. It holds in populations that have never been exposed to Western media. It holds in isolated tribes. It holds in every data set Singh examined. This is not a beauty standard imposed by advertising. This is a beauty standard imposed by biology. The 0.7 ratio correlates with optimal estrogen to progesterone balance, which correlates with fertility. The species is not interested in aesthetics. It is interested in viable offspring, and it has trained your eyes, without your knowledge or consent, to find the markers of viability beautiful. Schopenhauer saw this before Singh had the data to prove it. He wrote that every man who falls in love is evaluating the woman's capacity to bear healthy children, regardless of whether the thought ever crosses his conscious mind. You do not think about reproduction when you see a beautiful woman. You think about her, about wanting her, about being near her. But the wanting and the reproduction are the same thing, wearing different clothes. The will does not announce its purposes. It disguises them as your purposes. It makes you believe you are pursuing pleasure when you are actually pursuing pleasure, when you are actually pursuing propagation. This is humbling. It should be, because it means that the thing men pride themselves on most, their taste in women, the sophisticated appreciation they believe they have cultivated through experience and refinement, is a factory setting. You did not develop your type through years of romantic experience. Your romantic experience was shaped by a type that was preloaded before you drew your first breath. You think you discovered what you like. You were told what to like by a force that does not speak in words, but in hormones, in dopamine spikes, in the sudden quickening of your pulse when a specific set of physical features enters your visual field. And here is where Schopenhauer becomes genuinely interesting rather than merely provocative, because he did not stop at the surface. He did not simply say, men want young, beautiful women, and leave it at that. He went deeper. He argued that men, like women, are unconsciously driven toward complementarity. The same principle that drives a small woman toward a large man drives a man toward the specific physical and temperamental qualities that would balance his own in the production of offspring. A man with a large nose, Schopenhauer argued, will be instinctively attracted to a woman with a small nose. A man with a long face will gravitate toward a woman with a round face. A man of excessive intellect and nervous energy will be pulled toward a woman of calm, grounded physicality. This sounds almost absurd when stated directly. It sounds like phrenology dressed in philosophical language. But the underlying principle, that attraction is the species correcting toward a mean, optimizing for balance in the next generation, has been validated by research on genetic compatibility. Studies on the major histocompatibility complex, the MHC system that governs immune function, have shown that people are attracted to the scent of partners whose immune profiles are most different from their own. The offspring of such pairings have broader immune coverage. They survive better. The will of the species is literally operating through your sense of smell, guiding you toward the partner whose genetics complement yours at the molecular level. You think you like the way she smells. The species likes what her immune system will give your children. So now we have a picture. The woman is running a survival algorithm, selecting for strength, character, and the capacity to sustain life. The man is running a fertility algorithm, selecting for youth, health, and the capacity to produce viable offspring. Neither is aware of the algorithm running beneath their conscious experience. Neither chose the algorithm running beneath their conscious experience. Neither can override it. Both believe they are making a free choice driven by the unique complexity of their individual soul. Both are wrong. But here is the critical difference Schopenhauer identified, and this is the part that causes the most friction. The male algorithm is overwhelmingly visual. It operates at speed. It makes its initial assessment in seconds, sometimes fractions of seconds. The female algorithm is slower, more layered, more dependent on behavioral signals that unfold over time. A man sees a woman and knows instantly whether he is attracted. A woman meets a man and her attraction may build, shift, intensify, or reverse over the course of hours, days, or weeks as she gathers more data about his character, his competence, his position in the social hierarchy, his resilience under pressure. This difference in processing speed is the source of a staggering amount of miscommunication between men and women. The man who is confused because she seemed interested on the first date, but then lost interest. The woman who is confused because he was so intense at the beginning and then his attention waned once the conquest felt secure. They are not speaking different languages. They are running different programs. His program fires fast and focuses on acquisition. Her program fires slow and focuses on assessment. He is sprinting. She is surveying. And neither understands why the other is moving at the wrong speed. Schopenhauer observed this dynamic with the detachment of a naturalist watching two different species attempting to communicate. He did not blame either side. He blamed the architecture. The will of the species designed the male and female programs to mesh at the point of reproduction, but not at the point of mutual understanding. The species does not need you to understand each other. It needs you to desire each other long enough to produce offspring. After that, from the species' perspective, you are redundant. Your happiness, your compatibility, your ability to build a lasting partnership based on mutual comprehension. None of this was part of the design specification. You were experiencing a system that was built for survival, not for satisfaction. This is why Schopenhauer was so relentlessly pessimistic about marriage. Not because he hated women, not because he was bitter about his own romantic failures, though he had plenty, but because he understood that the feeling that drives two people together is a temporary chemical event serving the interests of a third party, the unborn child, and that once the chemical event subsides, the two people are left standing in a room together, the fog cleared, staring at a stranger they chose under the influence of a drug they did not know they were taking. But we need to pause here, because if we only present Schopenhauer's view, we are doing exactly what the sample script warned against. We are becoming preachers of a single perspective. And the truth about male desire is more complicated than even Schopenhauer acknowledged. He was right about the biology. The research is overwhelming, but he was catastrophically wrong about the scope. He treated the biological layer as if it were the only layer. He wrote as if the visual snap judgment, the fertility scan, the complementarity algorithm exhausted the entirety of male desire. It does not. It is the first movement, not the whole symphony. Men fall in love, not just in lust, not just in the grip of the biological scan. Men develop attachments that deepen over time, that have nothing to do with waist-to-hip ratios, that survive the fading of youth and the erosion of the physical markers Schopenhauer obsessed over. Men remain devoted to women long past the window of fertility. Men grieve for dead partners with a pain that serves no reproductive purpose whatsoever. Men sacrifice themselves for women in ways that actively harm their own genetic interests. The will of the species cannot explain a man who stays by his wife's hospital bed for years, holding her hand, knowing she will never recover. That is not the species optimizing. That is something else, something Schopenhauer's framework struggles to contain. This is not a minor objection. It is a fundamental crack in his architecture. He built his entire theory of sexual love on the premise that the will of the species is the sole author of attraction. But human beings are not solely biological machines. They are biological machines that developed consciousness, and consciousness has its own gravitational field. We form attachments based on shared experience, shared suffering, shared jokes that no one else in the world would find funny. We fall in love with someone's mind, someone's laugh, someone's specific way of being in the world that has nothing to do with their genetic contribution to the next generation. Schopenhauer could not fully account for this because his metaphysical system did not have room for it. The will was everything. Individual consciousness was secondary, a surface phenomenon, foam on the ocean of the will. But the foam is where we live. The foam is where we experience joy and grief and the specific, irreplaceable attachment to this one person, not a type, not a category, not a set of biological markers, but this singular, unrepeatable human being. So hold both truths simultaneously. Schopenhauer was right that desire has a biological engine that operates beneath conscious awareness. He was right that this engine shapes our attractions in ways we do not choose and cannot easily override. He was right that the species is using us, but he was incomplete, because the species is not the only thing using us. We are also using ourselves. We are also building something on top of the biology, something fragile and improbable and not guaranteed, but real. And that something is what separates love from mere attraction. Attraction is the will of the species. Love is what happens when consciousness rebels against the will and chooses to stay, not because the chemicals demand it, but because the person in front of you has become irreplaceable in a way that no biological algorithm could predict or manufacture. Schopenhauer would call this an illusion, a secondary delusion layered on top of the primary one. He might be right, but even if it is an illusion, it is the illusion that makes life bearable. And dismissing it because it lacks biological utility is its own kind of stupidity, the kind of stupidity that comes from being too brilliant to see what is right in front of you. Which brings us to the cruelest part of Schopenhauer's thesis, the part that applies equally to men and women, the part that does not discriminate by gender because it operates at a level deeper than gender, the great deception. The bait and switch that nature performs on every human being who has ever fallen in love and believed it would last. Because the puppet show does not end when the puppets find each other. That is when it truly begins. And what comes next is something so predictable, so structurally inevitable, that Schopenhauer argued you could set your watch by it. The passion dies, the fog clears, and you are left holding the receipt for a purchase you do not remember making. The great deception. There is a moment in every relationship that nobody warns you about. It does not arrive with drama. There is no explosion, no betrayal, no single catastrophic event you can point to and say, that is where it went wrong. It arrives quietly, almost politely. You wake up one morning next to the person you once could not stop thinking about. The person whose absence used to feel like a physical wound, and you feel nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even disappointment, just a strange, hollow neutrality. As if someone reached inside your chest during the night and turned off a switch you did not know existed. You look at them, you remember the intensity, you remember the nights you stayed up until 4 a.m. talking about everything and nothing. You remember the physical electricity, the way their hand on your arm could short-circuit your entire nervous system. You remember all of it, but you remember it the way you remember a film you saw years ago. It happened to someone who was you, but is no longer you. The memory is vivid. The feeling is gone. This is not a dysfunction. This is not a sign that you chose the wrong person. This is not evidence that something is broken in you or in them. According to Schopenhauer, this is the system working exactly as designed. The passion was never meant to last. It was meant to do a job. And once the job is done, or once the biological window for the job has passed, the chemicals withdraw, the fog lifts, And the two people who were pulled together by a force neither of them controlled are left standing in the wreckage of an illusion, trying to build something real on a foundation that was always temporary. Schopenhauer describes this process with a metaphor so brutal it reads like a curse. He compared lovers to two people who have been tricked by the species into a transaction they did not fully understand. The passion, the obsession, the all-consuming fire of early love is the species' bribe. It is the payment offered in advance for services rendered. The service is reproduction. And once the species has what it wants, once the next generation is secured or the opportunity has passed, the bribe is withdrawn. You are left holding the memory of a feeling that no longer exists, wondering if it was ever real. It was real. That is the cruel part. The feeling was genuine. The neurochemistry was genuine. The experience of being consumed by another human being was not a hallucination. It happened. It just was not what you thought it was. You thought it was the beginning of something permanent. It was the ignition sequence of something temporary. The rocket fuel that burns impossibly hot for a short time, just long enough to achieve escape velocity, to pull two people out of their separate orbits and into a shared one. But rocket fuel is not designed to sustain flight. It is designed to launch. And once the launch is over, you need a completely different kind of energy to keep moving. An energy that the will of the species did not provide. Because the will of the species does not care whether you keep moving. It cares whether you launched. Helen Fisher's neuroimaging research at Rutgers University mapped this process in the brain with devastating clarity. Early-stage romantic love activates the ventral tegmental area, the same region involved in cocaine addiction. The dopamine flood is massive, consuming, and structurally identical to a drug high. Fisher found that people in the first 6 to 18 months of a relationship display brain activity patterns indistinguishable from addicts in the grip of their substance. You are not falling in love, you are getting high. And like every high, it has a half-life. The half-life of romantic passion, according to multiple longitudinal studies, is roughly 18 months to 3 years. After that, the dopamine system down-regulates. The receptors become less sensitive. The same person who once triggered a neurological fireworks display now triggers a faint, familiar warmth at best. You have developed tolerance, not to them as a person, to the chemical cocktail they once triggered in your brain. You are not falling out of love with them. You are coming down from a drug, and the withdrawal does not feel like withdrawal. It feels like clarity. It feels like seeing the person for the first time, without the filter. And what you see, stripped of the chemical haze, may or may not be someone you actually like. This is the moment Schopenhauer was most interested in, the moment of disenchantment. He saw it as the will of the species revealing its indifference. The species brought you together. It flooded you with chemicals. It made you feel that this person was your destiny, your missing piece, the answer to every existential question you had ever asked. And then it left. It packed up and moved on to the next couple, the next pair of puppets, leaving you holding strings attached to nothing. He wrote that after the consummation of the great affair, every lover experiences a peculiar disappointment. He did not mean sexual consummation specifically, though he included it. He meant the consummation of the entire romantic project. The moment you have fully merged your life with another person, the moment the pursuit is over, the moment the will has achieved its objective, that is when the curtain falls and you see the stage for what it is. Not a cathedral of love, a breeding facility with nice lighting. You have seen this, you have lived this, or you have watched someone you know live it. The couple who were inseparable for 2 years and then slowly, imperceptibly, began to inhabit the same house like polite strangers. The passion did not leave because they did something wrong. It left because it was always going to leave. They did not fail at love. Love failed them. Or rather, what they called love was never designed to stay. It was designed to deliver them to a destination and then evaporate, like morning fog burning off to reveal a landscape that may or may not be where they wanted to end up. This is where Schopenhauer's pessimism becomes almost unbearable, because if he is right, then the most celebrated, most sought after, most universally desired human experience is a con. Not a con perpetrated by a malicious force, but a con perpetrated by an indifferent one. The will of the species is not evil. It is not trying to hurt you. It simply does not factor your happiness into its calculations. You are a means to an end. The end is the continuation of the species. Your joy, your heartbreak, your years of therapy trying to understand why the magic disappeared are externalities, side effects, collateral damage of a process that was never about you. And the evidence, if you are willing to look at it without flinching, is everywhere. Across cultures, the period of maximum divorce risk falls between the 3rd and 7th year of marriage. In societies without formal divorce, rates of infidelity spike in the same window. Anthropologist Helen Fisher, the same researcher who mapped the dopamine systems of early love, noted that this timeline corresponds almost exactly to the period required in ancestral environments to conceive a child, carry it to term, nurse it through the most vulnerable years, and bring it to a point of minimal independence. The 4-year itch, as she termed it, is the species releasing you from your contract once the minimum viable offspring investment has been secured. You were not designed for lifelong monogamy any more than you were designed for lifelong sprinting. You were designed for bursts, intense, consuming, chemically supercharged bursts of attachment, each one lasting just long enough to serve the species' needs before the next cycle begins. Serial monogamy is not a failure of modern morality. It is the default program. The anomaly is not the couple who splits after 5 years. The anomaly is the couple who stays together for 50. And Schopenhauer would argue that the couple who stays together for 50 has not defeated the will. They have simply found a way to live beside each other after the will has withdrawn, building something quieter, more deliberate, and fundamentally different from what brought them together. Whether that quieter thing is beautiful or merely tolerable depends on your capacity for a kind of love that has nothing to do with passion, a love built on choice rather than compulsion, on familiarity rather than fire, on the decision to remain beside someone not because the chemicals demand it, but because you have seen them fully without the fog and you have chosen to stay anyway. Schopenhauer did not write much about this kind of love. It did not interest him. He was a philosopher of the will, and the will is fire, not embers. But the embers are where most of human life actually happens. And his silence on the subject is one of his greatest blind spots. But before we address his blind spots, we need to follow his logic one step further into the darkness. Because the great deception does not end with the fading of passion, there is a second act, and the second act is even more disturbing than the first. The first deception is the bait, the passion that pulls you together under false pretenses. The second deception is the cage, the structure that keeps you together after the passion has gone. Schopenhauer argued that human beings, having been tricked by the will into pair bonding, then construct elaborate systems to prevent themselves from escaping the bond once the trick is revealed. Marriage, social obligation, financial entanglement, children, religious doctrine, legal penalties for separation. These are not, he argued, structures of love. They are structures of containment. They exist because the species cannot rely on chemistry alone. The chemistry fades. So the species has engineered social and institutional reinforcements, backup systems that keep the pair bonded long enough for the offspring to become self-sufficient, even after the original motivation has evaporated. Think about the social pressure to stay married. Think about the shame attached to divorce. Think about the language used: broken home, failed marriage, giving up. These phrases are not neutral descriptions. They are enforcement mechanisms. They make the act of leaving feel like a moral failure rather than a natural consequence of a temporary biological state running its course. The species cannot keep pumping dopamine into your brain forever. So it recruits culture, religion, law, and social judgment to do the job that chemistry can no longer do. You stay not because you want to, but because leaving has been made so painful, so stigmatized, so materially destructive, that staying feels like the lesser agony. Schopenhauer saw marriage as a trap within a trap. The first trap is romantic love, which lures you in. The second trap is the institution of marriage, which locks the door behind you. And the key, he argued, is thrown away by society, which has a vested interest in stable pair bonds, because stable pair bonds produce stable citizens who pay taxes, follow rules, and do not cause problems. The individual's desire for freedom is sacrificed on the altar of social order, and the sacrifice is disguised as virtue. You are not trapped, you are committed. You are not suffocating. You are not suffocating. You are not suffocating. The language itself is a cage dressed as a cathedral. This is deliberately provocative. And it is important to recognize that Schopenhauer's view of marriage was shaped by his own experience, which was the experience of a man who never successfully sustained a romantic relationship. He had affairs. He had a long-term relationship with a woman named Caroline Maidon that produced, by some accounts, a child who died in infancy. But he never married. He never submitted to the institution he critiqued so mercilessly. And this raises a legitimate question about the authority of his observations. Is he a clear-eyed observer who avoided the trap and can therefore describe it accurately? Or is he a man standing outside a building he was never invited into, describing the interior based on what he imagines through the windows? The honest answer is both. He was perceptive enough to see real structural problems in how human beings pair bond, problems that modern psychology and anthropology have extensively documented. But he was also limited by his own emotional range, his own inability or unwillingness to experience the thing he was dissecting. He performed an autopsy on love without ever having fully lived inside it. And an autopsy, no matter how technically precise, cannot tell you what it felt like to be alive. This matters because his conclusions, if taken without this caveat, lead somewhere bleak. If love is a biological trick, if marriage is a social cage, if passion is a drug with an expiration date, then what is left? What is the point of the entire enterprise? Why do we keep falling? Why do we keep building lives with other people when the blueprint is designed to fail? Schopenhauer's answer is stark. We keep falling because the will demands it. We cannot stop any more than we can stop breathing. The will of the species is not a suggestion. It is a compulsion embedded so deeply in our biology that resisting it feels like resisting gravity. You can intellectually understand that romantic love is a temporary chemical event designed to serve reproductive interests. You can memorize every study, every data point, every neurological map of the process. And the next time someone walks into a room and your brain catches fire, none of it will matter. The knowledge does not immunize you. It only makes you a conscious victim rather than an unconscious one. You fall with your eyes open. You see the ground rushing up, and you fall anyway. This is not nihilism, though it sounds like it. This is Schopenhauer's strange, inverted form of compassion. He is not mocking you for falling. He is telling you that falling is inevitable so that you stop blaming yourself when you hit the ground. The guilt you feel when the passion fades, the sense that you must have done something wrong, that if you had just communicated better or tried harder or been more present, the magic would have stayed. That guilt is misplaced. You did not kill the magic. The magic was designed to die. You are mourning the loss of something that was never meant to be permanent. and that mourning is real, but the expectation that created it was false. He argued that the greatest source of human suffering in romantic relationships is not the reality of love. It is the gap between the reality and the expectation. We expect permanent passion because every story we have ever been told, every song, every film, every poem, every cultural narrative about love promises permanence, forever, always, until death do us part. These are not descriptions of how love actually works. They are marketing slogans for the institution of marriage, designed to recruit new participants into a system that needs a steady supply of believers to function. The person who enters a relationship expecting permanent passion will be devastated when it fades. The person who enters a relationship understanding that passion is the launch sequence, not the orbit, has a chance of building something sustainable, not because they have lowered their standards, but because they have aligned their expectations with reality. They can appreciate the fire while it burns without mistaking it for the foundation. And when the fire dims, they can choose, consciously, deliberately, without chemical coercion, whether the person beside them is someone they want to build with, in the quieter, cooler, more honest light of day. Schopenhauer never got there himself. His philosophy of the will did not leave room for this kind of conscious, post-passion partnership. But his diagnosis of the problem, the gap between romantic expectation and biological reality, remains one of the most accurate descriptions of why relationships fail that anyone has ever written. He was better at identifying the disease than prescribing the cure. And that is a limitation worth naming, because naming it prevents you from using his philosophy as an excuse to give up on love entirely. The will of the species wants you to reproduce. It does not care about your happiness, but you are not only the will, you are also the consciousness that can observe the will. And that consciousness, fragile and imperfect as it is, can make choices the will did not anticipate. It can choose to stay when the chemicals leave. It can choose to build when the fire dims. It can choose to love in the quieter, more deliberate sense, long after the species has stopped caring whether you do. That choice is not the romantic love Schopenhauer dissected. It is something he barely acknowledged. But it may be the only real love there is, the love that begins where the biology ends. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because before we can talk about what comes after the will, we need to understand what happens when the will turns against itself. What happens when desire is denied? What happens when the person you are biologically engineered to want does not want you back? Schopenhauer had a theory about heartbreak, and it is, without exaggeration, one of the most terrifying descriptions of psychological suffering ever committed to paper. The battle between the individual and the species. You have been heartbroken. You know what it feels like. But you have never understood why it feels the way it does, why the pain is so wildly disproportionate to the event, why losing a person you have known for 6 months can feel worse than losing a family member you have known for 30 years. Why the rejection of a single human being, one organism among 8 billion, can make you feel like the entire world has ended. Why you cannot eat. Why you cannot eat. Why you cannot sleep. Why your chest physically aches, as if something inside you has been torn. You have been told this is emotional pain, that it is psychological, that it is all in your head. You have been told to get over it, to move on, to distract yourself, to remember that there are plenty of other people in the world. And every one of these platitudes bounces off you like a pebble thrown at a fortress wall. They do not penetrate, they do not help, because the pain you are experiencing is not emotional in the way people mean when they say emotional. It is existential. It is the deepest layer of your biological programming screaming that something has gone catastrophically wrong. Schopenhauer understood this. He understood it better than any therapist, any self-help book, any well-meaning friend who tells you that time heals everything. He understood it because his entire philosophy was built on the primacy of the will, and heartbreak is what happens when the will of the species is thwarted. It is not a minor setback. It is a system-level emergency, and the system responds with a level of suffering designed to be so unbearable that you will do anything, absolutely anything, to resolve it. Here is why the pain is so extreme. Remember the framework. The will of the species has identified, through you, a specific individual who represents the optimal complement to your genetic material. The will has flooded your brain with chemicals that create an overwhelming sense of destiny, of rightness, of this is the one certainty. The will has narrowed your focus so completely that this single person has become, in your neurological landscape, the most important object in the universe, more important than food, more important than sleep, more important than your own survival. Your brain has literally reprioritized its hierarchy of needs, placing this person above oxygen in terms of perceived necessity. Now remove that person. Tell your brain that this individual, who has been neurologically coded as more essential than breathing, is gone, not dead, not displaced by circumstance, gone by choice. They have looked at you, evaluated you, and decided you are insufficient. They have rejected the package the will of the species assembled and offered through you. They have said, no, your conscious mind can process rejection. It hurts, but you can rationalize it. People have different tastes. Compatibility is complex. Not everyone will want you. These are mature, reasonable, intelligent responses. But the will does not operate at the level of mature, reasonable, intelligent responses. The will operates at the level of survival. And at that level, the rejection is not a social setback. It is an annihilation event. The will interprets the loss of this specific person as the death of a potential future, not just the death of a relationship, the death of an entire lineage, the children you would have had, the genetic combinations that would have existed, the future that the will had already begun to build in your neurochemistry. All of it wiped out by a single word, no. This is why heartbreak feels like death. Because at the deepest biological level, it is a death, not your death, the death of the unborn, the death of possibility. The will is mourning children that never existed, and it is using your nervous system as the vehicle for that grief. You are not crying for yourself. You are crying for ghosts, for futures that collapsed before they began. And the will does not grieve quietly. It grieves with the full force of a survival mechanism that has been triggered by an extinction-level event. Schopenhauer wrote about this with a roundness that is unusual for a philosopher of his stature. He noted that the suffering of rejected love is so intense, so seemingly irrational, that it has driven countless human beings to suicide, not weak people, not unstable people, people who were, by every other measure, functional, intelligent, capable, people who could withstand financial ruin, professional failure, physical illness, the death of parents, and the collapse of friendships without breaking, but who shattered completely under the weight of romantic rejection. He asked why, and his answer is devastating in its simplicity. The suffering is extreme because the stakes, from the will's perspective, are extreme. This is not a setback in one department of your life. This is a failure of your primary biological mission. The will of the species does not recognize your career, your friendships, your hobbies, your personal growth as meaningful categories. It recognizes one category, reproduction. Everything else is infrastructure. Everything else exists to support the central project. When the central project fails, the will does not politely downgrade your mood. It detonates your entire emotional architecture. It makes existence itself feel meaningless because, from the will's perspective, your existence without this reproductive opportunity is less valuable. This is a horrifying framework, and it needs to be handled carefully, because the last thing the script should do is make someone in the grip of heartbreak feel that their suffering is merely biological and therefore dismissible. The opposite is true. Schopenhauer's framework does not diminish the pain. It explains why the pain is so much greater than you expected. It validates the experience by showing that the intensity is proportionate to a biological stake you were never told about. You are not overreacting. You are reacting at exactly the magnitude the will demands. And knowing this does not make it hurt less, but it does something arguably more important. It makes you stop questioning your own sanity, because that is the secondary wound of heartbreak. Not just the pain, but the shame of the pain. The sense that you should be handling this better. The self-judgment that whispers you are pathetic, that stronger people would have moved on by now, that your inability to eat or function or care about anything is a sign of weakness. It is not weakness. It is the will of the species in full emergency mode, hijacking every system you have. You would not call yourself weak for screaming when your hand is in a fire. Do not call yourself weak for breaking when the will has its hooks in your chest. Now let us talk about jealousy, because jealousy is the will's enforcement mechanism, and it is perhaps the ugliest emotion human beings are capable of producing, not because it is petty, though it often presents as petty, but because it is ancient, primal, and completely immune to rational intervention. You have felt it. The sudden nauseating drop in your stomach when you learn that the person you want is with someone else. The obsessive mental imagery. The involuntary visualization of them touching, kissing, being intimate with another person. You cannot stop the images. They arrive unbidden, violent, repetitive. Your rational mind knows that this is destructive. Your rational mind tries to intervene. They are allowed to be with someone else. You do not own them. This is unhealthy. Your rational mind might as well be whispering to a hurricane. Schopenhauer would explain this with terrifying precision. Jealousy is not about the other person. It is not about your ego. It is not about possession or control. Though it can manifest as those things, jealousy is the will of the species recognizing a competitor. Another organism has entered the reproductive equation, threatening to divert the genetic complement you have been targeted toward. The will does not process this as a social inconvenience. It processes it as a survival threat. Another male is attempting to access the reproductive resources the will has earmarked for you. Another female is diverting the provider the will selected for your offspring's survival. The response is not proportionate to the social situation. It is proportionate to the biological stakes. And the biological stakes, from the will's perspective, are life and death. This is why jealousy can make otherwise intelligent, composed, moral people behave like animals, because in that moment they are animals. The neocortex, the seat of reason and civilization, is being overridden by the limbic system, the ancient brain that deals in territory, threat, and survival. David Buss, in The Dangerous Passion, documented the staggering prevalence of jealousy-driven violence across cultures and centuries. He found that sexual jealousy is the single most common motive for homicide in every society ever studied. Not greed, not revenge, not political ideology. Jealousy, the will defending its reproductive interests with lethal force. Schopenhauer did not have Buss's data, but he had the observation. He watched human beings destroy each other over love with a regularity that no rational framework could explain. He watched duels fought to the death over a woman's affection. He watched families torn apart by infidelity. He watched empires destabilized by the sexual jealousy of kings. And he saw in all of it the same blind, screaming will, the force that does not think, does not negotiate, does not weigh consequences. It simply wants. And when it is denied, it rages. But here is where the analysis must deepen beyond Schopenhauer, because jealousy is not only a biological phenomenon, it is also a psychological one. And the psychological dimension adds layers that pure biology cannot account for. When you are jealous, you are not only experiencing a biological alarm, you are experiencing a profound threat to your sense of self. The person you wanted has chosen someone else, which means, in the emotional logic of the moment, that someone else is better, more attractive, more desirable, more worthy. Jealousy is not just I want them, it is I am not enough. And that second dimension, the self-worth dimension, is where jealousy becomes truly destructive, because it links your value as a human being to the outcome of a romantic selection you never fully controlled. Modern attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and expanded by researchers like Amir Levine and Rachel Heller, reveals that the intensity of jealousy is modulated by attachment style. People with secure attachment, those who grew up with consistent, reliable caregiving, experience jealousy but can regulate it. They feel the sting, but it does not consume them. People with anxious attachment, those who grew up with inconsistent caregiving, experience jealousy as a full-body emergency. The threat of losing the partner reactivates childhood fears of abandonment. The romantic rejection is not just a rejection. It is a confirmation of the deepest, oldest wound. I am not worthy of reliable love. Schopenhauer did not have attachment theory, but he intuited the pattern. He observed that some people are destroyed by heartbreak while others recover, and he attributed the difference to what he called the strength of the individual will. Some people, he argued, have a will so strong that it can absorb the blow and redirect. Others have a will so entirely consumed by the specific object of desire that losing it leaves them with nothing. The will has poured itself entirely into one vessel, and when the vessel breaks, the will has nowhere to go. It turns inward. It begins to consume itself. And self-consuming will is Schopenhauer's definition of suffering at its most extreme. This is where his analysis of heartbreak shades into something darker. Obsession, the phase that comes after rejection, when the rational mind has accepted the loss, but the will refuses to let go. You know the person is gone. You know they are not coming back. You know intellectually that continuing to think about them serves no purpose, but you cannot stop. You check their social media. You replay conversations. You analyze every interaction, searching for the moment it went wrong, the word you should not have said, the thing you could have done differently. You construct elaborate alternate timelines in which you made different choices and the outcome was different. This is not weakness. This is the will running its desperation protocol. The will does not accept failure gracefully. When its primary strategy, attraction and bonding, fails, it shifts to its secondary strategy, obsessive review. The purpose of the obsessive review is problem solving. The will is forcing your brain to revisit the failure repeatedly because it is searching for a solution. It does not understand that there is no solution. It is a survival mechanism designed for a world in which losing a mate was a genuine survival threat, a world in which finding an alternative might take years, a world in which the loss of this specific reproductive opportunity could mean the end of your genetic line. You do not live in that world anymore. You live in a world of 8 billion people, dating apps, and instant access to thousands of potential partners. But the will does not know this. The will is running software that was last updated 100,000 years ago. It is responding to a breakup in 2026 with the emergency protocols of a species that lived in bands of 50 on the African savanna. The mismatch between the ancient software and the modern environment is the source of the suffering. You are experiencing a Paleolithic emergency in a world that has moved on. Schopenhauer would say that this mismatch is not a bug. It is the fundamental condition. The will is always out of date. It is always responding to the world as it was, not the world as it is. This is why desire is always slightly wrong. This is why satisfaction is always slightly out of reach. The will was calibrated for a world that no longer exists, and it cannot be recalibrated. You are stuck with ancient hardware running in a modern environment, and the errors this produces, the irrational jealousy, the disproportionate grief, the obsessive attachment to a person who has made it clear they do not want you, are not malfunctions. They are the hardware functioning exactly as designed, in an environment that has made the design obsolete. But the will's darkest trick during heartbreak is the illusion of uniqueness. The will convinces you that this person, this specific individual, was your only chance, that there will never be another, that the connection you felt was singular, unrepeatable, cosmically ordained. This feeling is so powerful, so absolutely convincing, that it shapes your entire experience of the loss. You are not just losing a partner, you are losing the only partner, the one, the person who was meant for you. Schopenhauer would diagnose this as the will's most sophisticated deception, because the feeling of uniqueness serves the will's interests perfectly. If you believed the truth that the will could generate the same intensity of feeling toward any number of genetically complementary individuals, you would not fight so hard to secure this one. You would not sacrifice so much. You would not pour so much energy into the pursuit. The feeling of uniqueness is the will's way of concentrating your efforts, of narrowing your focus to a single target so that you pursue it with maximum intensity. It is the biological equivalent of putting blinders on a horse. You see only the one path forward. You run with everything you have, and if you fail, the blinders make the failure feel total, because you cannot see the other paths that exist on either side. The blinders come off eventually. Time removes them slowly, painfully, one chemical adjustment at a time. The dopamine systems rebalance. The obsessive circuitry calms. The ventral tegmental area stops screaming. And one morning, you wake up and the first thing you think about is not them. It might be breakfast. It might be work. It might be the weather. But it is not them. And in that ordinary, unremarkable moment, you realize you have survived something that felt unsurvivable. Schopenhauer would not celebrate this moment. He would call it a temporary reprieve. Because the will does not retire after one failure. It reloads. It finds a new target. It begins the cycle again. The chemicals return. The feeling of destiny returns. The blinders go back on, and you fall again, convinced once more that this time is different, that this time the feeling is real, that this time it will last. The cycle continues until the body can no longer play the game, until age withdraws the chemicals permanently, until age withdraws the chemicals permanently, until the will of the species, having exhausted its use for you, finally falls. And in that silence, Schopenhauer argued, you can finally think clearly for the first time. You can finally see the machinery for what it was. You can finally mourn not the specific people you lost, but the years you spent as a passenger in a vehicle you mistakenly believed you were driving. But we are not there yet. Because before we can talk about escape, about what life looks like on the other side of the will's control, we need to confront the most uncomfortable part of this entire discussion. We need to talk about Schopenhauer himself, not his ideas, him, the man, the biography, the blind spots, the contradictions. Because if you are going to use this philosophy to understand your own life, you need to know where the philosopher could not see past his own reflection. He held a mirror up to human desire with extraordinary precision, but mirrors have edges, and what lay beyond those edges reveals as much about the truth as anything the mirror contained. Where Schopenhauer breaks, you have been listening to a man explain the mechanics of desire with the precision of an engineer disassembling a machine. You have nodded along as he stripped away the romantic illusions, exposed the biological wiring, and revealed the will of the species pulling strings beneath every kiss, every heartbreak, every late-night confession of love. And much of what he said was brilliant. Much of it was validated by science he could not have anticipated. Much of it described your own experience with an accuracy that felt almost invasive. Now it is time to look at the engineer, because the engineer was broken, not metaphorically, not in the charming tortured genius sense that makes for a good biography, broken in ways that shaped his philosophy at its foundation, in ways he could not see because the damage was the lens he was seeing through. And if you take his framework and build your life on it without understanding where the cracks are, you will end up somewhere cold, somewhere isolated, somewhere that mistakes cynicism for clarity and loneliness for strength. Start with his mother, because everything starts with his mother. Johanna Schopenhauer was one of the most successful novelists in early 19th century Germany. She was witty, socially brilliant, and deeply ambitious. She hosted one of the most prestigious literary salons in Weimar. Goethe himself was a regular guest. She was, by every account, a remarkable woman. She was also, by every account, including her own, a terrible mother. When Arthur's father Heinrich died, likely by suicide, Arthur was 17. He expected grief. He expected the family to collapse inward, to hold each other in the wreckage. Instead, Johanna moved to Weimar, began her literary career, and entered what appeared to be a romantic relationship with a man 12 years her junior. She did not invite Arthur to join her. She made it clear that his presence was unwelcome. She wrote him letters that oscillated between cold formality and open hostility. In one, she told him that he was difficult to live with, that his personality was exhausting, that his tendency to brood and philosophize made him unbearable company. She said that she loved him as a mother must, but that she did not like him. Read that again. His mother told him she did not like him. If you want to understand why Schopenhauer wrote about women with such a peculiar mix of clinical insight and venomous contempt, start there. Do not start with his philosophy. Start with a 17-year-old boy whose father killed himself and whose mother told him he was too much. Start with the wound that never healed, because that wound is present in every sentence he ever wrote about the female sex, breathing beneath the logic like a heartbeat he could not hear. His essay on women is perhaps the most notorious piece of writing in his entire body of work. It is where admirers of his philosophy tend to look away and where his critics tend to stop reading entirely. He wrote that women are by nature intellectually inferior to men. He wrote that they are suited for the care of children because they are themselves childish, frivolous, and short-sighted. He argued that they live in a perpetual present, unable to grasp abstract thought or engage with ideas beyond the immediate and the practical. He compared them to a kind of intermediate stage between the child and the man, a bridge that the species crosses on its way to producing the real article. This is not a matter of interpretation. These are his words, and they are indefensible, not because they are offensive, though they are, but because they fail his own philosophical standard. Schopenhauer's entire system is built on the premise that the will operates beneath and beyond individual consciousness, that the forces driving human behavior are universal and impersonal. But when he wrote about women, he abandoned universality. He stopped being a philosopher and became a wounded son. He stopped analyzing the will and started ventilating his own. The anger is too personal, the contempt is too specific, the language is too heated for a man who prided himself on cold, dispassionate observation. Consider the contradiction. In the metaphysics of sexual love, he argues that women's selectivity in mate choice is a sophisticated, species-level intelligence operating through instinct. He credits women with a form of biological wisdom that men lack, a deeper attunement to the needs of the next generation. He describes female choice as the mechanism through which the species refines itself. This is a position of enormous respect for the female role in the evolutionary process. But on women, he dismisses the same creatures he just credited with species-level wisdom as intellectually trivial, emotionally shallow, and fundamentally inferior. Both positions cannot be true simultaneously. Either women are the sophisticated instruments of the will's deepest intelligence, or they are childish creatures incapable of abstract thought. Schopenhauer held both views because he was operating on two tracks: the philosophical track, where he followed the logic wherever it led, and the emotional track, where he followed the wound wherever it bled. The wound bled a lot. His relationships with women were, without exception, disasters, not the romantic, dramatic disasters of a passionate man who loves too intensely. The cold, transactional, suspicious disasters of a man who could not trust. He never married. He had affairs that were more like arrangements, structured to minimize emotional exposure while satisfying physical need. His longest relationship with Caroline Maiden, a chorus girl he met in Berlin, lasted on and off for over a decade, but was conducted on terms that ensured he never had to be vulnerable. He kept her at a distance. He provided financial support. He visited on his schedule. He maintained control at every point. And then there is the incident with Caroline Marquet. In 1821, a 47-year-old seamstress named Caroline Marquet was making noise outside Schopenhauer's apartment. He asked her to leave. She refused. He physically threw her out, and she fell down the stairs, sustaining injuries that left her partially disabled. She sued him. The court ruled in her favor. Schopenhauer was ordered to pay her a quarterly allowance for the rest of her life. When she died 26 years later, he reportedly wrote in his journal, "The old woman dies, the burden is lifted." This is the man who wrote about the will with such penetrating insight. This is the man who saw through the illusions of romantic love with a clarity that anticipated neuroscience by a century and a half. And this is a man who threw a woman down a flight of stairs and celebrated her death because it freed him from a financial obligation. The genius and the cruelty lived in the same body. And the philosophy cannot be fully separated from the biography, no matter how much his admirers might wish it could. This does not mean his philosophy is worthless. It means his philosophy is human. It was produced by a specific mind with specific damage, and the damage is visible in the work if you know where to look. The metaphysics of sexual love is brilliant in its broad strokes and contaminated in its specifics. The framework of the will as the driving force behind attraction is powerful and largely validated. The specific claims about female inferiority are the scar tissue of a man who was rejected by the first woman he ever loved and never recovered. But here is what makes this complicated rather than simple. His misogyny was not unique to him. It was the ambient atmosphere of his era. Hegel, his great rival, was no better. Nietzsche, his most famous intellectual descendant, was arguably worse. The entire Western philosophical tradition, from Aristotle to Kant, treated women as lesser beings with a casualness that is breathtaking to modern eyes. Schopenhauer was not an outlier. He was a product of a culture that gave brilliant men permission to treat half the species as philosophical furniture. This does not excuse him, it contextualizes him. And the distinction matters because dismissing Schopenhauer entirely because of his misogyny is as intellectually lazy as accepting him entirely because of his insights. The man who saw through the illusion of romantic love with X-ray precision was the same man who could not see through his own emotional damage. The philosopher who argued that the will blinds us to our own motivations was himself blinded by a will he never examined, the will to punish the feminine for the wound his mother inflicted. This is the pattern you must learn to recognize, not just in Schopenhauer, but in every thinker, every system, every philosophy you encounter. The insight and the wound are always intertwined. The place where a thinker sees most clearly is often adjacent to the place where they are most blind. Nietzsche's insights about power came from a man who was physically frail and socially isolated. Freud's insights about sexuality came from a man whose own sexual life was by all accounts deeply repressed. Marx's insights about class came from a man who lived off the wealth of his industrialist friend. The wound creates the lens. The lens reveals something genuine, but the lens also distorts, and your job as a thinking person is to look through the lens while remaining aware of its curvature. So what did Schopenhauer's curvature distort? Several things, each of them significant. First, he consistently underestimated female intellectual capacity because his framework required it. If the will is the primary force and intellect is secondary, and if women are more closely aligned with the will through their biological role, then it follows within his system that women are less intellectual, but the premise is flawed. Being more attuned to biological imperatives does not make you less capable of abstract thought. It makes you differently situated. The mother who can instantly read the emotional state of a nonverbal infant is performing a cognitive feat of extraordinary complexity. The fact that it does not look like philosophy does not mean it is not intelligence. Schopenhauer defined intelligence narrowly in terms that happened to align with his own strengths, and then declared everyone who did not match his definition inferior. This is not philosophy. It is self-portraiture disguised as universal truth. Second, he treated women as a monolithic category. Women appears throughout his writing as if 50% of the human species could be captured in a single set of generalizations. This is the same error he would have excoriated in any other context. His entire philosophy of the individual depends on the premise that each person's will is uniquely configured, uniquely expressed, uniquely aimed. But he suspended this premise when he wrote about women. Suddenly, individual variation disappeared. Suddenly, all women were the same. The philosopher of the will became, when discussing women, a philosopher of the stereotype. Third, and most importantly, he could not see that his own attraction to women was shaped by the same machinery he described. He wrote about male desire as a biological program, but positioned himself as somehow outside the program, observing it from a neutral vantage point. He was not outside it. He was inside it, and his inability to form healthy attachments, his pattern of keeping women at a distance, his transactional approach to intimacy, these were not signs of philosophical superiority. They were symptoms of avoidant attachment, the psychological consequence of a mother who told her son she did not like him. His detachment was not wisdom, it was armor, and his philosophy of the will gave the armor an intellectual justification it did not deserve. This is the danger of Schopenhauer for the modern reader. Not that he is wrong, he is often startlingly right, but that his rightness can be used to justify emotional avoidance. It is very easy, especially for a young man who has been hurt, to read Schopenhauer and feel liberated, to think love is just biology, attachment is just the will, I do not need anyone, I am above the machinery. This feels like enlightenment. It is not. It is the philosophy of a wounded man being used as a template by another wounded man who does not want to do the harder work of healing. The harder work is this, holding two truths simultaneously. Truth one, Schopenhauer was right, that desire has a biological architecture that operates beneath conscious awareness, and that this architecture often pulls us toward choices that do not serve our happiness. Truth two, the existence of this architecture does not mean that love is only biology, that attachment is only the will, that intimacy is only a trap. The biological layer is real, the layer above it, the layer of conscious choice, of sustained commitment, of choosing to remain present with another person after the chemicals have faded is also real. And Schopenhauer's inability to reach that second layer is a limitation of his philosophy, not a feature of it. Modern psychology has built extensively on the foundation Schopenhauer laid, but it has also corrected his most significant errors. Attachment theory demonstrates that secure, sustained bonding is not just possible, but is the primary predictor of psychological well-being across the lifespan. The Grant study, the longest longitudinal study of human development ever conducted, tracked Harvard men for over 75 years and concluded, in the words of its director George Viant, that the only thing that really matters in life is relationships, not achievements, not wealth, not intellectual superiority, relationships. Warm, sustained, vulnerable, imperfect human connections. Schopenhauer would have recoiled from this conclusion. He would have called it sentimental, naive, a capitulation to the will. But the data is overwhelming. People who form secure attachments live longer, get sick less often, recover faster from illness, experience less cognitive decline in old age, and report higher levels of life satisfaction at every stage. The porcupine dilemma, his famous metaphor about the impossibility of closeness without pain, is real. The quills do prick. Intimacy does hurt. But the alternative, the cold, defended, philosophically justified isolation that Schopenhauer chose, is not freedom. It is a different kind of prison, one with better lighting and more books, but a prison nonetheless. He died alone. On September 21, 1860, in his apartment in Frankfurt, his landlady found him sitting in his chair, dead of pulmonary failure. His poodle, Atma, named after the Hindu concept of the world soul, was beside him. He had outlived his fame. He had outlived his rivals. He had outlived nearly every person who had ever been close to him. And the philosophy that told him he was above the need for human connection sat on his bookshelves, beautifully bound, universally admired, and entirely incapable of holding his hand as he died. This is not meant to mock him, it is meant to complete him, to see the man whole rather than as a plaster saint of pessimism. He saw further into the machinery of desire than almost anyone before or since. He identified patterns in human behavior that took the rest of the world a century to catch up with. His framework for understanding attraction, heartbreak, jealousy, and the fading of passion is more sophisticated and more accurate than most of what passes for modern relationship advice. And he was wrong about women, not at the margins. At the center, he was wrong because he was hurt, and he built a philosophy that protected the hurt instead of healing it. He turned his wound into a worldview and called it truth. You can take his insights without taking his damage. You can use the framework without living inside it. You can see the will operating beneath your desires without concluding that the will is all there is. This is the mature engagement with a difficult thinker, not worship, not dismissal. Selective integration, taking the scalpel and leaving the poison. But this raises the final question, the question that Schopenhauer himself considered the most important of all. If the will of the species is the engine of desire, if romantic love is a biological trap, if passion fades, if heartbreak is inevitable, if even the philosopher who mapped the entire system could not escape his own damage, then what do you do? How do you live? How do you love? How do you navigate a world built on a lie without becoming either a victim of the lie or a casualty of the truth? Schopenhauer had an answer. Several answers, actually, and they range from the sublime to the extreme, from contemplating great art to renouncing desire entirely, from finding temporary refuge in beauty to seeking permanent liberation through the denial of the will itself. The exit doors are ahead. But before you walk through them, you should know what you are leaving behind and what you might find on the other side. You have seen the machinery. You have watched Schopenhauer disassemble the most powerful experience in human life and lay the parts out on the table. The will of the species, the biological algorithms, the chemical bait, the fading of passion, the cage of institutional reinforcement, the disproportionate agony of heartbreak, the ancient software running in a modern world. You have seen all of it. And now you are standing in front of a question that cannot be avoided. What do you do with this knowledge? Because knowledge without application is just entertainment. on the kind of knowledge we have been discussing is not the kind you can set down and walk away from. Once you see the strings, you cannot unsee them. Once you understand that the feeling you called love was at least partially a biochemical event engineered by a force that does not care about your happiness, that understanding lives in you permanently. It colors every future attraction. It whispers in the background of every new relationship. It sits beside you on every first date, quietly narrating the biological subtext beneath the candlelight and the conversation. Some people hear this narration and become cynics. They decide that since love is a biological trick, they will refuse to be tricked. They will keep everyone at a distance. They will treat relationships as transactional. They will have sex without attachment, connection without vulnerability, intimacy without risk. They will call this freedom. They will call this strength. And they will be, in the quietest hours of the night, profoundly alone. Schopenhauer would recognize these people because Schopenhauer was these people. Because Schopenhauer was these people. He spent his life keeping the world at arm's length, and he built an entire philosophical system to justify the distance. And we have already seen where that led him. To a chair in Frankfurt, to a dead body discovered by a landlady, to a poodle as his most consistent companion. The philosophy was brilliant. The life was cautionary. But the opposite response is equally dangerous. Some people hear the narration and ignore it. They decide that the biological framework is reductive, that love is sacred, that their feelings are more than chemistry, and they throw themselves back into the machinery with the same blind faith they had before. They chase the dopamine high. They mistake intensity for compatibility. They fall in love with the feeling of falling in love and confuse the launch sequence for the destination. They end up in the same cycle. Passion, disillusionment, heartbreak, recovery, repeat. Each revolution slightly more exhausting than the last, each landing slightly harder on the bones. Schopenhauer would recognize these people too. They are the will's most reliable soldiers. They do exactly what the species needs them to do, again and again, without ever stepping back far enough to see the pattern. Their sincerity is genuine. Their suffering is genuine. And their refusal to examine the mechanism driving both is what keeps the cycle spinning. So there is a third path. It is harder than cynicism and harder than blind faith. It requires you to hold two contradictory truths in your mind at the same time without collapsing into either one. Truth one, the will is real. The biological machinery is real. Your desires are not entirely your own. The passion will fade. The chemicals will withdraw. The person you choose in the grip of infatuation may not be the person you would choose with clear eyes. Truth two, you are not only the will, you are also the consciousness that can observe the will. And that consciousness, imperfect and fragile as it is, can make choices the will did not anticipate. It can choose commitment over compulsion. It can choose presence over passion. It can choose the difficult, unglamorous, unsexy work of remaining beside another person after the fireworks have stopped, not because the chemicals demand it, but because you have decided with full knowledge of the machinery that this person is worth the effort. This is not the love Schopenhauer wrote about. He wrote about the will's love, the love that seizes you, overwhelms you, and discards you. He barely acknowledged the other kind. The kind that is not a feeling, but a practice. The kind that does not arrive like lightning, but is built like a house, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of patience or forgiveness or sustained attention at a time. This love is not romantic in the cinematic sense. It does not make your heart race. It does not keep you awake at 3 a.m. trembling with longing. It is quieter than that, sturdier than that, and ultimately, for those who can sustain it, more nourishing than anything the will ever offered. But Schopenhauer was not interested in nourishment. He was interested in liberation, and his proposed exits from the will's control are worth examining. because they range from the practical to the radical, and because each one reveals something important about what it means to be a conscious creature trapped inside a biological machine. His first exit was aesthetic contemplation, art, music, literature, philosophy. Schopenhauer argued that when you stand before a great painting, when you lose yourself in a symphony, when you read a passage of writing so perfectly constructed that it momentarily dissolves the boundary between you and the world, something extraordinary happens. The will goes quiet. For a brief, precious interval, you are no longer wanting. You are no longer desiring. You are no longer being pulled towards some future goal by the invisible strings of biological necessity. You are simply perceiving. You are pure consciousness without agenda. The will, which normally drives every waking moment of your existence, temporarily releases its grip, and you experience what Schopenhauer considered the closest thing to genuine freedom available to a human being. He was rapturous about music in particular. He considered it the highest of the arts because it does not represent the world. It does not depict objects or tell stories or reproduce reality. It speaks directly to the will itself, bypassing the intellect entirely. When you are moved by a piece of music, you are not processing information, you are resonating. The will within you is vibrating in sympathy with the will expressed through the composition. This is why music can make you weep without giving you a reason. It is communicating at a level beneath language, beneath thought, beneath the entire apparatus of rational understanding. It is will speaking to will, and in that communication, for a moment, the suffering stops. Apply this to the question of love. If aesthetic contemplation temporarily silences the will, then the person who cultivates a rich inner life of art, music, and philosophical reflection has access to a form of satisfaction that does not depend on another person. This is not a prescription for isolation, it is a prescription for self-sufficiency. The person who can find genuine fulfillment in a symphony, in a novel, in the act of deep thought, is not disparate. They are not starving for connection because their internal world is barren. They come to relationships from a position of abundance rather than need. And abundance, paradoxically, makes them better partners. Because a person who does not need you to complete them is a person who can love you without consuming you. Schopenhauer's second exit was more extreme. He looked east. He looked to the Hindu concept of Maya, the veil of illusion that obscures the true nature of reality. He looked to Buddhist teachings on the cessation of desire. And he saw in these ancient traditions a confirmation of his own philosophical conclusions. The will is suffering, desire is suffering. The endless cycle of wanting, pursuing, briefly obtaining, and then wanting again is the wheel of samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth that Buddhist practice seeks to escape. Schopenhauer was the first major Western philosopher to engage seriously with Eastern thought, and the convergence between his independently derived conclusions and the teachings of traditions thousands of years old struck him as powerful evidence that he was on to something fundamental. His prescription, drawn from these Eastern sources and filtered through his own system, was radical. Deny the will, not resist it, not manage it, not negotiate with it. Deny it. Recognize that the will's demands for pleasure, for sex, for love, for reproduction, for the continuation of your genetic line are not your demands. They belong to a blind, purposeless force that is using you as a vehicle. And the moment you truly, deeply, existentially recognize this, you can begin to withdraw your consent. You can stop participating. You can let the desires arise without acting on them. You can watch the will thrash and scream and demand, and you can sit quietly in the center of the storm, unmoved, observing it the way you would observe a tantrum thrown by a child you are not responsible for. He pointed to the ascetics, the monks, the saints, the rare individuals throughout history who achieved a state of genuine renunciation. not the performative renunciation of someone who gives up worldly pleasures because they think it makes them holy. The real thing. The person who has seen through the will so completely that its demands simply stop registering. The person who has achieved what Schopenhauer called the denial of the will to live. This, he argued, was the only true freedom, not happiness, freedom. The two are not the same. Happiness requires the will because happiness is the temporary satisfaction of a desire, and desire is the will's territory. Freedom requires the absence of the will, and the absence of the will does not feel like joy. It feels like peace, a vast, empty, luminous peace that has no object, no goal, no direction. It simply is. This is beautiful philosophy. It is also, for the vast majority of human beings, completely impractical. You are not going to become an ascetic. You are not going to renounce desire. You are not going to sit in a room and meditate until the will falls silent and you achieve a state of permanent tranquility. You have a job. You have bills. You have a body that gets hungry and tired and aroused. You have a heart that, despite everything you have heard in this script, will fall in love again. The will is not going to release you because you read a philosophy book. It is not going to stop pulling your strings because you understand the mechanism. Understanding the mechanism is not the same as escaping it. And this is where Schopenhauer's philosophy, for all its brilliance, reveals its deepest limitation. He could diagnose the human condition with surgical precision. He could map the architecture of suffering better than almost any thinker in history. But his prescriptions were either temporary, like aesthetic contemplation, or extreme, like the denial of the will. He did not offer a middle path. He did not describe a way to live inside the machinery with awareness, with grace, with the ability to love fully while seeing clearly. He saw only two options: be a puppet or cut the strings. The possibility that you could see the strings and dance anyway, not as a puppet but as a conscious participant who chooses the dance despite knowing its origin, did not fit neatly into his system. But it is perhaps the most honest response to everything he taught. Because here is the truth that Schopenhauer almost reached but could not quite grasp. The will is not the enemy. It is the engine. Without it, there is no life, no creation, no music, no art, no love of any kind. The will is what makes a mother hold her child. The will is what makes an artist spend 10 years on a masterpiece no one may ever see. The will is what makes a man stay beside a dying partner, holding her hand, knowing there is no biological utility in the gesture, knowing the species does not care, doing it anyway because something in him, something deeper than the will, or perhaps the will, transformed by consciousness into something unrecognizable, simply cannot leave. Schopenhauer could see the will as a tyrant. He could not see it as raw material. He could not see that consciousness does not only observe the will, it sculpts it. It takes the blind, purposeless drive and shapes it into something the species never intended. Loyalty, sacrifice, the choice to remain faithful not because the chemicals demand it, but because you gave your word. The choice to forgive, not because it is strategically advantageous, but because the person in front of you is flawed in exactly the ways you are flawed, and condemning them would require condemning yourself. The choice to love not because the will ignites you, but because you have decided quietly, without drama, without fireworks, without the intoxication of the launch sequence, that this person matters to you, and that mattering is not a chemical event, it is a human one. This is what Schopenhauer missed. Not because he was not intelligent enough to see it, because he was too hurt to feel it. His mother's rejection walled off the part of him that could have understood that vulnerability is not weakness, that attachment is not captivity, that needing another person is not a failure of philosophical rigor. He built a system that explained everything about love except the part that makes it worth the suffering. And that part, the part that survives the chemistry, the part that endures past the fading of passion, the part that holds on when every biological signal says to let go, is the part that his system could not contain. So where does this leave you? You came here to understand what women want, and you have learned something far larger than that. You have learned what the species wants and how it uses both men and women as instruments of its purpose. You have learned that desire is not a choice, but a current, and that swimming against it is exhausting, and that swimming with it is dangerous, and that the only sustainable response is to learn to navigate it with open eyes. You have learned that women's attraction is shaped by ancient selection pressures that prioritize strength, resilience, and the capacity to sustain life. Not because women are shallow, because the stakes of female reproductive investment are so high that the selection mechanism had to be ruthlessly precise or the species would not have survived. You have learned that men's attraction is shaped by equally ancient pressures that prioritize fertility markers and genetic complementarity, not because men are crude. Because the will does not communicate in words, it communicates in desire, and desire operates at the level of the body, not the mind. You have learned that the passion that brings two people together is a temporary chemical event with an expiration date, and that the failure of passion is not a failure of love, but a feature of the system. You have learned that heartbreak is disproportionately painful because the will interprets romantic loss as an extinction-level event. You have learned that jealousy is a survival mechanism running on ancient hardware in a modern world. And you have learned that the philosopher who taught you all of this was himself a casualty of the forces he described. A man who could see the trap, but could not escape it, who could map the prison, but could not walk free. The question is not whether Schopenhauer was right. He was right about enough to matter. The question is what you build on top of his rightness. Because the floor he laid is cold. It is honest, it is sturdy, it is unflinching in its refusal to comfort you with illusions. But it is cold, and you cannot live on a cold floor forever. You have to build something on it, something warmer, something that acknowledges the biology without being imprisoned by it, something that sees the will clearly and chooses with full knowledge to love anyway. Not because you are a puppet, not because the chemicals command it, but because you looked at another human being, saw them completely, saw the machinery operating in both of you, saw the will pulling its strings, saw the expiration date stamped on the passion, saw all of it, every gear, every wire, every hidden mechanism, and you said, I know what this is. I know what it costs. I know it will hurt. I choose it anyway. That choice is not the will of the species. The will of the species does not choose. It compels. That choice is something else entirely. It is the will of the individual, the conscious, deliberate, eyes-open will of a person who has seen the truth and decided that the truth is not a reason to stop. It is a reason to stop. It is a reason to start loving not from ignorance, but from understanding, not from compulsion, but from freedom, not from the desperate need to fill a void, but from the quiet strength of someone who is already complete and is choosing freely to share that completeness with another person. Schopenhauer would call this naive. He would say you are still inside the machinery, still being manipulated, still mistaking a more sophisticated form of the will's influence for genuine autonomy. Maybe he is right, but he died alone with his poodle. And the person who builds a life with another human being, knowing the full cost, knowing the machinery, knowing that the passion will fade and the chemicals will withdraw and the will of the species will move on to its next project, that person is not naive. That person is brave, braver than the philosopher who hid behind his books, braver than the cynic who hides behind his detachment, braver than the romantic who hides behind his illusions. Because the romantic says, love will save me. The cynic says, love is a lie. And the person who has truly understood Schopenhauer, the person who has taken his medicine and survived it, says something far harder, something that requires more courage than either romance or cynicism. They say, love will not save me. It is not a lie. It is a beautiful, temporary, biologically engineered, chemically sustained, evolutionarily optimized experience that will change me, hurt me, and eventually fade. And I choose it, not because I have to. Because in a universe driven by a blind, purposeless will, the act of choosing to love with open eyes is the closest thing to meaning I will ever find. Schopenhauer showed you the machinery. What you build with it is yours.